Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my September wrap-up. So while September was a little bit light on videos, it was a pretty busy month for me. We're starting to get our Christmas push at work, so there were some overnights that just wrecked my body. So reading was pretty sporadic, but I have some things to share with you. I started off reading an arc of The Last Namsara by Kristen Ciccarelli. So this is an advanced reader's copy that I received in exchange for an honest review. I went to a HarperCollins Insider event through work as an Indigo employee. I am not sponsored, I am not paid to promote this book in any way, and this is my honest opinion on it. So this is a story of Asha. Asha is the daughter of the king in a kingdom where dragons are dangerous and they feed on stories. So Asha spends most of her time out in the world killing dragons for her father, for her kingdom. She is also in an arranged marriage to a horrible man, and her father promises her that if she kills the biggest, oldest dragon, the dragon that holds all of the old stories in the world basically. So Asha goes on this quest to kill this last dragon, and she attempts to lure him with storytelling. So she's feeding him things to make him powerful in an attempt to lure him out. So Asha encounters some folks who challenge her desire to destroy the dragons and to end storytelling, and the novel really goes from there. It is a fun read. It is an interesting dragon story. It kind of reminds me of the Daenerys portions of Game of Thrones, plus How to Train Your Dragon. If you are a dragon lover, if you are interested in high fantasy, I would highly recommend this piece of YA because I did really enjoy it, and I think that if that's kind of your area of interest, you will like this too. The next book I read in September was Basic Witches by Jaya and Jess Zimmerman. This I heard about on a podcast. So Marcelle Cosman and Hannah McGregor are two Canadian lady scholars that have a fortnightly podcast talking about the Harry Potter series. Hannah McGregor of the Oh Witch Please podcast has started her own podcast called Secret Feminist Agenda, in which she talks about various topics. It is a really interesting podcast. It's short, it's quick, and it always gets me thinking, and I will link both of those podcasts down below for you. One of those podcasts is a crossover episode between Witch Please and Secret Feminist Agenda, and it was talking about this book, Basic Witches. While our bookstore puts this in the occult section, this reads to me more as a self-care book. This uses witch and that language not to align itself with practitioners of Wicca, but more to reclaim the historical / pop cultural witch and all of her baggage in a feminist self-help book. It is very much about self-care alongside various historical snippets about women who were tried as witches or historical witches. Those bits were fascinating. I would read a whole book like that. If you see, I've got some tabbies. Some of the things that I've tagged are beautifully phrased quotes for getting really busy neoliberal humans to take a step back and to care for themselves more than they care for their work or their company or their wealth. You need to take care of your own body if you're going to enjoy or succeed in any of those other things, and this is a really nice reminder of that. The spells feel silly to me, and I could see folks who find this book in the occult section of our bookstore taking this home and finding the spells really disrespectful and just really bonkers. So I'm not sure how folks who actually practice Wicca would find this book, but if you move it into the well-being section of a bookstore and make it more of a self-care book, a book on managing your own health and well-being, your mental health and well-being, and sort of reclaiming witches and rooting this self-care in rituals, I can see that being a lot more accurate to what this book is. Then I read How Not to Fall by Emily Foster. Emily Foster is a human with a PhD in sex, human sexuality. And she wrote this book that speaks back to 50 Shades of Grey. And all of the ways that 50 Shades of Grey is really glorifying and romanticizing an abusive relationship. This book really highlights consent and pleasure and safety and everybody's health and well-being. It's not normally my type of thing. I don't really read romance, but this sort of pinged on some reading list somewhere because somebody made that comparison between 50 Shades of Grey and this and talked about the ways in which this book spoke back to 50 Shades. I would recommend this to folks who either really liked 50 Shades of Grey, who really like romance and erotica, and are maybe looking for something that is still sexy but consensual, or if you read 50 Shades of Grey and you had a lot of problems with it, this, I think, might also be a lot of fun because it puts the two characters in very similar situations, but makes really clear where boundaries are and what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. The next book I read is a piece of middle grade fiction for folks 9 to 12 years old, and it is The Care and Feeding of a Pet Black Hole by Michelle Cuevas. So this is a story of 11-year-old Stella Rodriguez who approaches NASA wanting to set a meeting with them because she wants to get a recording of her father's laugh on this sort of space capsule that encapsulates what humanity is, that they're going to launch into space so that should aliens encounter this thing, they will get a sense for what humans are before they come to our planet. And she feels that her father's laugh is just the epitome of human laughter and should be on this thing. While she's at NASA, there is a breach and she's ushered out of the building and she notices that a small black hole is following her home. And at first, it's really convenient to have a pet black hole because you can throw all sorts of things that you don't want into this void, like your broccoli and your Brussels sprouts and your dirty laundry and your brother's annoying CDs. All of that can go in the black hole. Stella starts having some problems with the black hole when he eats something really precious to her. And the story really goes on from there. This story, I think, is perfect because it is, on the one hand, incredibly ludicrous and silly and laugh out loud funny, while at the same time tackling grief. On the one hand, I would recommend picking this up for young folks who are looking for something funny, and I would also recommend if you have a young person in your life who has lost someone in their lives. This might be a good book to get them because it is kind of funny. It might cheer them up a little bit, but also because I think the ways in which Stella talks about the loss of her father and sort of comes to terms with the loss of her father might be helpful. It might be helpful to see another young person who is grieving in the way that your young person might be. I really, really enjoyed this. I would highly recommend it. The next book I read is Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. So I read this for two reasons. One, I was going through my bookshelves, sort of purging things that had been sitting here a really long time that I had no interest in reading anymore. I was reading the backs of all of them, deciding, do I really want this story in my TBR pile or not? I have a secondhand copy of An Acceptable Time that I picked up while on vacation from a used bookstore, not realizing that it was like the last book in a series. So I started reading it, was very confused, realized my mistake, and stopped reading it, and I have never read it since. The first reason I picked this up is because if I'm going to go through my TBR and I want to read this last book in the series, I should probably read the first four. The second reason I picked this up is that it's going to be a movie soon, and I would like to see the movie, so I gotta read the book. So this is the story of Meg, who is missing her father. Meg's father is presumed dead because he's been gone so long, but he's a scientist who was doing some sciencey things when he disappeared. Meg sort of is treated kind of oddly by her peers because she's one of the few children who has a single parent household. She's sort of the oddball. She's not very smart, she's not very funny, she's not very athletic, she's just sort of meh at everything. And her brother Charles Wallace is always very kind to her and they get along really well. Charles is very gifted and intuitive and everybody loves him. And Meg, Charles, and their neighbor Calvin end up going on this adventure through time to find her father. If we imagine time as linear, they travel through time by sort of finding wrinkles in the fabric and like wrinkling the fabric of the timeline and bringing 2 points closer together, which I thought was really cool. It was a really cool concept, and I I love it. I want to see more. I didn't love Meg as a character, but I love the world building and I love the time travel. So I do plan on continuing with the series. So that was a good read for me. Then I read Outlander. This year my mom and I watched Downton Abbey together and we loved it, and Netflix popped up Outlander as like a suggested thing to watch. And I thought, oh, okay, like if we're gonna watch Outlander, I better read the book first. It took me a while to read the book, and my mom started without me. I'm kind of glad my mom started without me, because it's apparently like the sexiest sex scenes on TV, and there were just so many sex scenes in this book that I'm glad we're not watching it together. This is a genre stew. It's historical fiction, it's science fiction, it's fantasy, it's romance. It's all here. And it's actually kind of fun to see all of these different genre tropes coming together in this really, like, addictive way. Like, I got to the end of this book, and I don't consider myself a person who really enjoys romances or historical fiction, but like the science fiction fantasy is usually where it's at for me. But all of the elements, I really liked all of the elements, and I got to the end of this book and I wanted the second one like right away. I have too many unread books to buy the second one, but I am excited to continue on with the series. I loved seeing Claire back in the 1700s. I will have to say that this is a problematic fave, because if you read this with your brain turned on, Jamie and Claire's relationship is not one that you would want to aspire to. At one point, Jamie beats Claire because she disobeys him, and that is his duty as man. Claire rationalizes it and like comes to be okay with being beaten by Jamie. And that's one of those things where like you see like everybody who I had watched on BookTube talk about this book like loved this romance. This was their ship. They want Jamie. Reading that scene, my brain went like ping, and I was like, oh my god, this is the worst. I hate this. Why are we romanticizing this? And then I was like, no, shh, you're gonna enjoy this book. Don't think about it. Just enjoy the time travel. Just enjoy Scotland in the 1700s. Problematic fave, but still a new fave. Then, mid-September, I volunteered at the Telling Tales Festival, which is a children's literature festival in Ontario. It does like readings and activities and events, and it's just a lot of fun. And so I volunteered this year, and on my break, I sort of walked around and I saw Melanie Florence talk about her work. So Melanie Florence is a biracial human. She is Scottish and Cree, and she writes a lot about indigeneity. And I picked up 2 of her books this month because I think she's a great human, and I think these are great books. So the first one here is Stolen Words, which was illustrated by Gabrielle Grimard. So this is a story of a little girl who is walking home from school with her grandfather and asks him what is the word for grandfather, and he explains that he doesn't have that word anymore because when he was little he was put in a residential school and the words were stolen from him. And so this picture book for children looks at the legacy of residential schools and what it has done to Indigenous culture and Indigenous language. And I think it's really important that as a white settler Canadian that I think about these narratives, that we think about these narratives. What does it mean for us to live here now? What sorts of unearned privileges do we have? What is the legacy of colonialism that Canada sort of likes to keep quiet? I don't know about you, Canadian folks, but my like grade school education on Canadian history didn't really unpack what we did to Indigenous folks. I don't think I learned about residential schools in school. I learned about residential schools in the United Church. So as a young person, I was a member of the United Church, and the United Church at one point while I was there in the youth programming formally apologized to Indigenous folks for the Christian-based residential schools. I don't ever remember residential schools coming up in grade school, so that there are picture books now that children can access, not only Indigenous children, but white settler children and settler children. The Japanese internment camps were another one. I did not learn about Japanese internment camps until my first year of university doing a CanLit course where we read Wason Choi's The Jade Peony. So like a lot of parts of Canadian history are just completely left out. Children don't have any access to that, so like I think books like this are really important. The other book I have here is Missing Nimama, which was illustrated by Francois Thisdale. So this addresses the missing and murdered Indigenous women, which we have lots and lots of because racism and colonialism devalues certain bodies, Indigenous bodies. So it's a whole systemic shit pile, and this book addresses that in a really clever way. So it shows us the words in Cree and what they mean, and then throughout the book, in the illustrations, you have the words in the pictures. The way this story is told, there's regular text and then there's italicized text, and the regular text is the story of a little girl and her grandmother, and the italicized text is slightly more poetic. It is the point of view of the missing and murdered mother. This book captures another really important part of our current Canadian history, our current Canadian climate, in which the bodies of Indigenous women are not valued by Canadian authorities because they go missing and are murdered at incredibly high rates, and it's totally unacceptable that this is happening. But as humans with votes, we should be thinking about, because what we vote for and whose policies we support really affect Indigenous folks. So like this book for me is really a call, it's a reminder to be political, to be a good ally, to support folks, to help make changes. Again, it's a really important read. Then I read The Wolf is Back by Robert Priest and illustrated by Joan Krigsman. So this is a collection of children's poetry published by local publisher Woolsack and Wynne. I had the opportunity of stepping into their shop during Supercrawl. It's really cute, and so I picked this up. This is a really interesting collection of poetry that tackles different historical events, different children throughout history, the environment. It's all in here. It's all very political, but also very approachable. And I think also, like, as an adult reading this, I learned about some historical figures and historical events that I'd never heard before, and so this was really cool. This was really, really cool. And I think if you have young folks who have to do poetry, there's always a poetry unit in every grade, and they're allowed to pick, this would be really cool to pick from because it is really, really fascinating. So I would highly recommend this. The next book that I read is The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Now I picked this up because I'm sort of going through a quarter life crisis and I'm watching a lot of children's television shows and movies, and The Worst Witch was recommended to me on Netflix, and I realized that it was based on a book, and so I decided to read the book, and the book is really simple. The television show I actually prefer a lot better. It fleshes out a lot more of the characters and the events, but for the most part the television is reasonably true to the book, and I can imagine that if you have somebody in like the early reader, like 6 to 8 range, they would probably really enjoy this, because the main character here, Mildred Hubble, is a quirky little witch who can't get anything right, basically. She's not like a Hermione Granger witch, the overachiever witch. She's a very relatable, like, clumsy, awkward human, and very endearing. So I would recommend this if you have somebody, again, in that 6 to 8 range. Those are all the things I read this past September. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? What was your favorite book from the month of September? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!